Hey guys, I'm Naya and welcome back to the channel. For today's video, I decided to talk to you about the Tearalaments archetype. Disclaimer, that's how I'm going to pronounce it. I have no idea how to pronounce it, so I will go back to how I would pronounce it in my native language, which would be Tearalaments. So, we're gonna do that. So we're gonna talk about the archetype because it's the only one sort of in the OCG that's been able to hold its own against Splight, and both of them are going to be dropping in Power of the Elements coming this summer, and I figured it would make sense to talk about it to sort of introduce you to the archetype and let you know everything I can. So the Tearalament archetype is a fusion summoning archetype which consists of dark aqua monsters, at least most of them, and they all have similar effects when it comes to the main deck monsters, which if they are sent to the graveyard by card effect, they can perform a fusion summon by placing the materials from hand, field and or graveyard to the bottom of the deck, including that card that was triggered by being sent to the graveyard. And their fusion plays sort of lead to their fusion monster searching a trap card which sets the opposing monster face down, and that's pretty much why they were, among other things, able to hold their own against Splight, because of setting the normal summoned monster that the Splight player summons, since the Splight monsters need to have a rank level or a link to a monster on the field to be able to special summon themselves. So by setting the initial monster, you sort of lock the opponent out of summoning their Splight monsters, and that's why Tearalaments have been quite successful in the OCG. That's one of the reasons, and the other one is because they did receive new support, which we will also cover in today's video. So before we get into it card by card, I would like to encourage you to let me know down in the comments what you think of the archetype, as well as which of the, Splight in this one and maybe other ones will you be picking up moving forward into the summer format. And of course, subscribe as well. A lot of you are still not, and I would love for you to be part of this community. So, getting into the actual card by card, we have 4 main deck monsters, and the first one is actually a starter, and it's Tearalament Rhinoheart. So Rhinoheart, if it's normal or special summoned, you can send one Tearalament monster from your deck to the graveyard, and by doing that, you essentially trigger all of their effects to be able to fusion summon. And the second effect it has is when this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can special summon this card but banish it when it leaves the field, and then send one Tearalament card from your hand to the graveyard. And basically, since it says, and if you do, send one Tearalament card from your hand to the graveyard, it's not and if you do, you can send. So when this card essentially hits the graveyard, you need to have a Tearalament card in your hand to be able to activate its effect to special summon itself back. Then the other 3 main deck monsters all have similar effects when it comes to the second effect, the fusion summoning one, which I mentioned already. And then each of them has an effect that makes the player, I should say, mill 3 cards from the top of their deck, because that's how the deck gets going, by actually sending cards to the graveyard by card effect. But each of them gets to the milling part a different way. So when it comes to Siren, it says during your main phase, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, send one monster from your hand to the graveyard, then send top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. Then Mayro says if this card is normal or special summon, you can send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. And then Haufinius says when your opponent activates a monster effect on the field, quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. Then they're in archetype fusion monsters. The first of them, Kayatokara, says that if this card is special summoned, you can take one Tearalament card and either add it to your hand or send it to the graveyard from the deck. Then the second effect is that you can target one monster you control, special summon one Tearalament monster from your hand or graveyard, and send the targeted monster to the graveyard. And then the third effect is that if this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can mill the top 5 cards of your deck, and you can use each of those effects. So this card is honestly really, really good, and it's the one you would usually go into if you're, for example, starting off with Reinhardt and then sending one to the graveyard, activating the effect, performing a fusion summon. And then the last one is Kaleidoheart, and it says that it cannot be used for a fusion summon. And then it says if this card is special summoned or an aqua monster is sent to your graveyard by card effect while this card is on the field, you can target one card your opponent controls and shuffle it into the deck. And then if this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can special summon this card, and if you do, send one Tearalament card from your deck to the graveyard. And then they also have a card that's not in archetype by name exactly, but it's still goes together with the Tearalament archetype, and it's a Ruined Realm per Rhino. And it says that when this card is activated, you can add one Tearalament monster or Visa Starfrost from your deck to your hand. And then it also says that all fusion monsters and Tearalament monsters you control gain 500 attack, and also has a really busted third effect, which says that if Tearalament monster is placed into your deck from graveyard or field, deck or extra deck as well, while this card is on the field, you can target one card on the field and destroy it. And then as for the chap cards, we have Meta Noise, which I mentioned before. It says that if you control a Tearalament monster or Visa Starfrost, you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls and change it to face-down defense position, then send one Tearalament monster from your deck to the graveyard. And then if this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can add one Tearalament monster from your grave to your hand, and you can only use one effect of this card per turn and only once that turn. So this one is a bit more limited than the other ones are. Then it's another chap card, Tearalament Salik, which says that if you control a Tearalament monster or Visa Starfrost, you can target one effect monster your opponent controls, negate its effects, then send one monster you control to the graveyard. And if it's sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can add one Tearalament monster from your deck to your hand. And then as the last one, we have a counter chap card, which is Tearalament Crime, and it says when a spell chap card or monster effect is activated while you control a Tearalament monster or Visa Starfrost, you can negate the activation, shuffle that card into the deck, and send one monster from your hand to the graveyard. And if it's sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can target one of your banished Tearalament monsters and add it to your hand. Alright, so as we have come to determine, essentially what they do is they summon fusion monsters, they search the trap card to counter Splight. But they have a lot of fusion monsters available to them because some builds run, for example, Shadow monsters, which in tandem with them, of course, you can fusion summon Winda. You can also fusion summon Dragostapelia, for example, because it's easily summoned. So I figured we would go through a couple lists, and since there have been a lot of OCG metagame reports, I think it's between 5 and 6 different reports, which included Tearalaments and some topping builds, and we can go through them and sort of see the evolution. And to start with, we have but basically it's a branded Tearalament build because since branded fusion does send to the graveyard, you can trigger the Tearalament effect and continue with your plays. It also played fusion redeployment to special summon Rhinoheart. And yeah, you have the fusion monsters, the branded fusion monsters in the extra deck, and of course the standard Tearalament stuff, also Winda, also Dragostapelia. But then builds started to change because they were losing to Retaliating Sea. And of course, that's not the only reason, but builds tend to, get better over time when people actually have enough time to test out different stuff. Then we still have one more build though with the branded stuff, and it's pretty much simple. Like you have the hand traps, a couple Tearalament monsters, and then just branded stuff and the standard extra deck. But as builds started to change and progress, someone, for example, paired Tearalaments together with Dangers. Nessie is an Aqua type, and it immediately synergizes with them since the fusion monsters need Aqua types. So we have a build of just Danger Tearalament. The standard Shadow stuff is in there. You have the basic lineup of spells with Call by Instant Fusion and Terraforming Instant Fusion. Of course, great for example, their fusion monster being level 5. And then of course you have the trap cards. Most of the builds play each one of them at 1 or maybe 2 of them at 1, not every single one in the archetype, but it depends on the person's preference, of course. But then what happened was OCG got Ishizu support in Duelists of the Pyrex scene, and the Ishizu support is what really boosted the archetype. And I've read articles about how it wasn't really there, to really be able to compete with Splight, but with the support it started becoming more and more dominant because the Ishizu support cards, how they aid to the Tearalament archetype is they mill cards to the graveyard, and some of them mill cards to the graveyard by being sent to the graveyard, and they can be sent to the graveyard to special summon the other ones. We'll go into them, but basically that's the main idea. You send cards to the graveyard, and then because they are fairies, they can be sent with Diviner of the Herald, and then you can also play Herald of Orange Light, so you have an additional negation. You send those new support cards to the graveyard to be able to then mill cards and hit the Tearalaments monsters and get going that way. And we're gonna go over the support cards and we're gonna go over a build as well. So as for the support cards, first we have Keldo the Possessed statue, which says that you can discard one other Earth Fairy monster to special summon this card from your hand, and then you can add one Exchange of the Spirit, which we're gonna get into, or one card that mentions it from your deck to your hand. And then as a quick effect, you can banish this card from your field or grave and target up to 5 cards in either graveyard, shuffle them into the deck. But if Exchange of the Spirit is not on your field or in your graveyard at activation, you can only target up to 3 cards. And why this one was important as an addition as well is because since Tearalaments really started to gain popularity, of course, you need to be prepared for the Tearalaments mirror match. And by being able to shuffle up to 5 cards from the graveyards to the deck as a quick effect, you prevent the fusion summon from happening, since the monsters that activate to fusion summon need to place themselves to the bottom of the deck as part of the fusion materials as well. So you essentially just completely prevent that, and that's really nice, because in the OCG it seems like, and this is a bit of a tangent, I don't want to be too long, but it seems like some decks just really dominate the meta, and when this happens they need to adapt their builds and change their builds accordingly really fast. So you have one tech, you have another one, you have another one. And since Tearalaments decks started being more and more popular, since they send cards to the top of the decks to the graveyard, what happens is some cards from the Splight archetype get sent to the graveyard, and that's not okay for Deep Sea Diva, because it needs to have the target in the deck. And that's why the Splight players consequentially cut the Deep Sea Diva from their deck and started playing other cards which can also special summon from the grave. So if it happens that you play a Tearalaments player and they mill the top of your deck, then even if your targets are in the graveyard, that's no issue. And I felt like that's really interesting to see. And yeah, that's why this support is really important. And then Modora the Cestus Oracle has the second effect, the same one as Keldo the Possessed statue. Basically, it shuffles cards back from the graveyard into the deck. But the first effect is different, and it says that you can discard one other fairy type monster, Earth Fairy type monster, to special summon this card from your hand. And then you can place one Gravekeeper's Trap, which is also a new trap card, from your deck face up in your spell and trap card zone. And then the 2 Earth Fairy type monsters that you would usually like to discard off of the first 2 cards effects would be Kelbeck the Ancient Vanguard and Agido the Ancient Sentry, because both of them trigger if they are being sent from the hand or deck to the graveyard, and they mill the top 5 cards of each player's deck to the graveyard, and then they both have separate second parts of the effect. So Kelbeck says then if Exchange of the Spirit is in your graveyard, you can set one trap from your grave to your field. And Agido says then if Exchange of the Spirit is in your graveyard, you can mill 5 more cards from either player's deck to the graveyard. And then their first effects are also different, and Kelbeck says that if a card is sent from your opponent's hand or deck to the graveyard, you can target one opponent's special summon monster, special summon this card from your hand, and then you can return the opponent's monster to the hand. And then Agido says if a card is sent from the opponent's hand or deck to the graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand, then special summon one Earth Fairy level 4 monster from your grave, except Agido. So how these cards work, essentially what you would want to achieve is for either of the first 2, you would discard either of the other 2 and special summon them, do something, and then the other one triggers, mills 5 cards, and then ideally if you have the second one, it also triggers because cards were sent from your opponent's deck to the graveyard, and it can special summon itself and do something else. So it's this sort of loop of all of these cards, and they also aid the Tearalaments archetype in itself. So Exchange of the Spirit, as it's mentioned on all of these cards, has been out for some time, and it says if both players have 15 or more cards in their graveyards, you can pay 1000 life points to make them swap the graveyards and their decks, and you can only use this effect once per duel. And Gravekeeper's Trap says while Exchange of the Spirit is in your graveyard, your opponent cannot activate card effects in the graveyard or special summon monsters from the graveyard. So this is insane. Like, this effect is legit amazing. And then it also has the effect to, during the main phase, you can discard one card and search one Gravekeeper's monster or Earth Fairy monster. And that's like, it's honestly so busted, like looking at this support, how it just works together, and with the Tearalaments cards as well. And then you can place the Gravekeeper's Trap via one monster and then search the other one. And also by discarding one card, if you discard either of the ancient like stuff we mentioned before, so Cowback or Agido, you also trigger their effects. So it's honestly really cool. And then it has a very funny third effect, which says that if this card is already face up, you can, before your opponent draws for their draw phase, declare one card name, and if it's the declared card, you can send it to the graveyard, which is very weird and specific, but you know, I like it. I think it's really cool. All right, and then we can go through a build which was recently successful. So on the last OCG report, the Ishizu cards were played with the Tearalaments, and especially Mudora. It's been said here in the article that it's becoming necessary at 3 copies because of the increase in mirror matches of Tearalaments. And you have the Rhino Heart at 2, and then the other ones are usually at 3 when it comes to these ones, and then the Meiro is at 2, but it can also be run at 3, which that build only ran one of the Shadow monsters, so that's why it ran 3. But other cards are usually very standard. Like I mentioned, you have Diviner of the Herald and Herald of Orange Light to be able to send the fairies, and then the Field Spell and also the Gravekeeper's Trap, and then one of each of the Tearament traps, and then you have Exchange of the Spirit. And as for the extra deck, some rank 4 XYZ monsters are being used because the fairies are all level 4, for example, and also the Tearalaments, at least some of them. And if you play a Dweller, Baguska, stuff like that is really powerful, and it's kind of free in this deck. So yeah, that's what the build is looking like right now. And like when it comes to Tearalaments, I think they are a really interesting archetype. It's a new way of fusion summoning, which at this point is kind of hard to imagine that it's even possible, but it is. It's really interesting, and I like how it's impacting the format and how it can actually hold its own against Blight, like I keep mentioning. Overall, of course, we're not going to be receiving the Tearament cards as well as the support together. So yeah, maybe that's a bit, I guess, sad, because we know there's a busted way to play this deck. But first, starting off with the Tearalaments, I guess we're just gonna have to play some of the builds that were earlier in the OCG reports. That's why I wanted to cover them as well. So yeah, with that being said, we're also going to go over their new support that hasn't dropped even in the OCG yet, and that's pretty much going to wrap this video up. And then as for the support cards, we have a new fusion monster, which is Tearalament Ludokaros, and it says that your other aqua monsters cannot be destroyed by battle, and also when your opponent activates a card or effect that includes an effect that special summons, you can negate the activation, destroy it, and send one Tearalament card from your hand or face-up field to the grave. And then if this fusion summon card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can special summon this card. So basically, as for the support, what it actually brings to the archetype is a form of negation when it comes to the fusion monsters. And as for the spell cards, you have a couple additions which really boost the deck even more, because at this point you only have the main deck monsters which just fusion summon, and the fusion monsters, for example, search their trap cards. So it's just a basic step-by-step little combo. But with those cards in particular, which I'm looking at them right now, you have more things to do. So the Tearament Grief, for example, special summons a Tearament monster or Visa Starfrost from your deck or grave, so you extend your plays that way. And then you can also, you need to send one monster with the same type or attribute from your field to the graveyard. And then as for the other effect, if it's sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can target one of your banished trap cards, Tearament trap cards, and add it to your hand. And then you have a quick play spell card which targets a spell trap on the field and shuffle it into the deck and send one card from your hand to the grave. And if you control Visa Starfrost, you can target 2 instead. So it's also like adding a form of in-archetype removal, especially for something like Spell and Trap, which can be really annoying at times. So that's, I think, amazing, being a quick play spell card on top of that. And then if it's sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can target one Tearament trap in your grave and add it to your hand. And then also Tearalaments Scream, and it says if a monster is normal or special summoned and you control a Tearament monster or Visa Starfrost, you can send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. And then also on top of that, the monsters your opponent controls will lose 500 attack until the end of this turn. And if it's sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can add one Tearament trap from your deck to your hand. So looking at this support, it's honestly so good. It provides something for basically every single part of the game you would want it. You have, you know, negation, you have a form of removal, you have essentially a monster reborn or a special summon from the deck, which is really free, and the mill from top 3 cards of your deck, which also in return will trigger your Tearalament monsters or like a Shadowrun monster or something like that. And then on top of that, if they're sent to the graveyard by card effect, they also have effects. So honestly, looking at it, it's really interesting. Like, I get that Slide is really dominant, but this deck just keeps on not only receiving support, but just really being able to compete. And yeah, I think it's a really, really interesting deck looking at it moving forward. And since the power of the elements is slowly approaching, yeah, I think it's cool to look at it and sort of just get prepared. So with all of that being said, hopefully this video wasn't too long. I have no idea how long it's going to take, and hopefully I also covered everything so you have a bit of an idea what the deck does and what it's centered around, what the plays are, what the support is moving forward. And of course, if you liked the video, if you found it entertaining, informative, any of that, like it, you know, and check out all the social media, sub to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!